Welcome to this tutorial on using your own Notion setup with Pop Invoice. If you already have an invoicing system in Notion, this video will walk you through how to integrate it with Pop Invoice. When you sign up for Pop Invoice, an invoice template is automatically saved to your Notion workspace. But if you already have your own setup, you can connect Pop Invoice to your existing databases instead. To use your own Notion setup with Pop Invoice, you'll need a few key databases. First, you'll need an invoice database, which is where all your invoices are stored, tracked, and managed, each row representing a single invoice. In the invoice database, you'll need a status property. The status property is what Pop Invoice uses to track invoices to know when they need to be created or followed up. The recommended statuses are ready, which marks the invoice as ready to be created, created, which is automatically set when the PDF is generated, sent, again automatically set if the invoice is emailed via Pop Invoice, and paid, automatically set if the invoice is marked as paid in Pop Invoice. You can have other statuses as well, and the property can be called anything you like. In the invoices database, you'll also need a relation to a client database. So the next database you need is one that holds all your client details, like their name, address, and email. Quite often, this is the database that people already have in their setup. And as I just mentioned, this client database needs to be related to the invoice database, so each invoice is linked to the right client. Also, as a minimum, you need the client's address, as this will be used on the PDF invoice. Also recommended is the client's name and email, so you can send the PDF directly from Pop Invoice. If your invoices include multiple items, you'll also want an invoice line items database. This stores details about individual products or services included in each invoice and should be linked to the invoice database. So to recap, you need an invoice database with a link to a database holding your client information, and optionally, you can link your invoice database to a line items database. Everything else in your setup is optional and can be customized based on your needs. If you want a more detailed breakdown of the recommended setup, check out the link in the video description. Now you have all the required databases set up in Notion, let's go through how to connect Pop Invoice to your Notion setup. First, you need to point Pop Invoice to your Notion databases. To do this, go to Pop Invoice and click on the Notion menu option on the left-hand side. Then click on the Databases button, and finally click on Run Custom Setup. You'll be taken through a series of screens with detailed instructions on how to connect your Notion workspace to Pop Invoice. Click Next to proceed to the Select the Databases section, then Next again, and then click OK, select the databases. Now you'll be prompted to connect to Notion. Make sure you select the correct Notion account from the drop-down, then click Next. Now, make sure you click the option Select Pages to share your Notion workspace with Pop Invoice. Here, search for the workspace that contains your databases and select it. If your databases are in different workspaces, you can select more than one. Click Allow Access to grant Pop Invoice access. Finally, follow the instructions on the page to first select your invoices database, then the client database relation, and finally the invoice items relation. Now that Pop Invoice has access to your databases, you'll be taken to the Settings page where you can choose which properties Pop Invoice should use. At the top here, select the status property from your invoices database, then add each status type that represents when an invoice is ready, created, emailed, and paid. The statuses can be named anything you like. These are the recommended ones. Next, select the client address property from the client's database. All other properties are optional, but Pop Invoice will work better with some of them, such as the invoice date, due date, client invoice name, and client invoice email. Also, remember to save your settings here. Finally, go to the Templates section. This is where you configure the invoice PDF and specify which properties to use. Edit the standard template, and at the top here, you can add your own business logo and address details. Then scroll down to the line items section. This already has some columns added, so just select the properties that relate to each heading. You can also add additional columns or delete columns as needed. Underneath is the Totals section. Select which properties contain the invoice subtotal, tax, and total. Again, you can add or delete elements here. For example, delete the tax item if your invoices don't require it. Once you've made your changes, remember to save the template. So now that you've connected Pop Invoice to your Notion setup, you can start creating invoices right away. If you have any questions, please email me at joe@popinvoice.com or use the chat section of our website to contact me there. You can also check out the help pages for more detailed descriptions and troubleshooting advice.